Following the success of Persona 3 in 2006, Atlus would release an enhanced version of the game only 1 year later, titled Persona 3 FES. This version of the game would implement changes based on the feedback gotten with Persona 3. More opportunities to spend with social links were added, new personas were added, weapon fusion from the classic Megaten games was added, some slight rebalances, a new hard mode, and some extra minor events were added. There were other games at the time basically doing the same thing, but unlike these two, this game would actually make it to the West before getting an HD remaster. A common thing that enhanced editions like to add is post-game content, usually taking place right after the final boss or reloading your game clear to right before the final boss and opening up new content outside of the main story. Persona 3 FES would do something like that, but a bit different. Instead of being part of the main game, this extra gameplay content would take the form of its own campaign separate from the main one. This is convenient for people who don't want to replay all of Persona 3 again and just want to jump straight into the new stuff, even allowing you to import data from the original Persona 3 if you have any. Persona 3's original story would be dubbed Episode Yourself in Japan and The Journey in the West, while the second campaign taking place after would be dubbed Episode Aegis, or The Answer, in the West. A lot of discussion I see around this part of Persona 3 tends to be pretty negative. From my understanding, most of it has to do with how much people loved the original story and find a lot of the things in The Answer to undermine the messages in The Journey. But does it though? Honestly, after beating Persona 3 for the first time, I initially just wanted to skip it and move on to Persona 4. So I did, and about 2 dungeons into the game, I thought, fuck it, let's play some more Persona 3. Depression. Episode Aegis has a very powerful opening act. When Yukari picks up the phone, you can immediately tell by the tone of both her and Fuka's voices that something is wrong. Fuka's sounds like she's trying to convince Yukari to spend time with them for the first time in a while, and Yukari sounds like she's purposely trying to put all of them behind her. This really had me thinking about the types of relationships you see with roommates. And when I say roommates, I specifically mean living with people you aren't related to. Although I never lived on campus during my college years, I spent a lot of time on campus with people who did live there. Sometimes roommates are pretty tight with each other, sometimes they hate each other, and sometimes they're just roommates and not much more than that. Sometimes when I came over to my friend's villa, they'd sit and chill with us for a tiny bit. Most of the time though, they would just go off and do their own thing. And that's basically how it all started with C's. This is a group of people who were all basically neutral with each other, but over the course of Persona 3, you basically saw these people grow from being just roommates to practically family. And that makes this scene kinda painful to watch. The dormitory is closing down and everyone's turning in their evokers and armbands, but not everyone's even showing up. Mitsuru's talking about how everyone's going down their own path now. Feels like the end of a Power Rangers season, but way more depressing. And this is all taking into account the protagonist's death at the end of Persona 3. When I first saw that ending, it didn't really hit me that the protagonist died, but that didn't make the ending any less meaningful to me, because all I really cared about was how they were able to keep their promise of meeting again. The ambiguity of it honestly made it better in my opinion. I think most people already understood it as him dying to begin with, so okay, I'll roll with it. A reminder to the players that regardless of whether a person lived a fulfilling life or not, their death is still painful for the people around them. Especially Aegis, who literally declared her purpose in life was to protect him right before he fucking dies. Unlucky. So, without a purpose and no shadows left to fight, she decides not to enroll in the next school term. The story actually takes place from Aegis' perspective. It's one thing to lose sleep over something like this, but she stops having dreams and stops requiring sleep. basically reverting back to the machine she once was. And after that all too familiar blue butterfly flies by, this is where our story truly begins. A persona summoning android just like Aegis with all the same specs and everything comes out of the floor of the dorm, revealing the abyss of time. This is causing time not to move forward and trapping everyone inside the building. And to escape, everyone's gotta do their old thing again and crawl through the deepest parts of the abyss. Or there's the faster alternative of just killing everyone, which the mysterious robot does try to do at first. But hey, we're trying to make more game content here, so we can't have that. So Aegis strangely awakens to the wildcard power of the protagonist, replacing her persona Pallas Athena with Orpheus. And the newcomer, Metis, joins in on the dungeon crawling endeavors. Social links are completely gone here. I mean, it makes sense, you're trapped. There's no one to socialize with, nor is this the time to be socializing. It's just you and the dungeon. At the end of each section, named after each ring of hell, you will reach a door to someone's past, bringing you closer to finding the cause of this predicament. Functionally, the dungeons work exactly as they do in the main game, but there are some changes that are worth mentioning. The gameplay was designed to be more challenging than the original game. Some people compare it to that of the Journey's hard mode, and well, that's not really true. Yes, the game is more challenging, but not for the same reasons as a simple difficulty setting. None of the damage modifiers, ambush rates, or escape rates from hard mode apply here, and when you save your game, the file will say normal mode. What makes this game more challenging is that the game really expects you to have played the original, and have gotten a good understanding of the game's mechanics, especially controlling your party. The game basically expects you to have mastered the tactic commands as you start the game right off the bat with all of them, and are quickly expected to make use of them. The fights in this game require a bit more variation aside from full assault and heal support. While there are ways to make use of the other commands in the Journey, they weren't absolutely necessary. There was a lot of leeway in the original game, but taking better advantage of your resources produced better results. You already were probably using knockdown for random encounters, but now you're expected to use them on bosses as well. You may even end up using some of the more uncommonly used ones like Assign Target, Same Target, or Attack Fallen. In the original game, only the first half of the game's bosses really had weaknesses, and all the hard early bosses and all the latter half bosses basically have none. It forced you to rely more on external factors to strategize, like damage boosting accessories for DPS or huge HP boosting equipment for defensive play. Most of the boss fights in episode Aegis consist of a group of different types of enemies, instead of 3 of the same guy or 1 big guy like in the original. Each of these guys has their own weaknesses and work off each other to cover them, or their skill sets complement each other, so it's up to you to pick them apart with your own strategies. And people think this is a bad thing just because they don't know how to control their party. Like, I understand it's a bit much to expect the player to learn 8 different characters' skill sets and behavior patterns. If you don't like it, you don't like it, that's fine. When I first played Persona 3, I wasn't really a big fan of it either. In fact, it wasn't until I played episode Aegis where I really started to appreciate it and recognize the full potential of it. Now it's basically like second nature to me. I'll use the very first boss of both the original and episode Aegis as examples. The Venus Eagles were very elementary level bosses meant to teach you the advantages of exploiting weaknesses, all-out attacks, and switching your main character's weapon to learn the perks and drawbacks of each weapon. Then you have these guys, the immortal Gigas and his visceral Mayas. The Gigas is weak to wind and repels fire, while the Mayas are weak to fire. However, they also have passive dodge skills to their respective weaknesses. You can't always count on being able to knock every enemy down to get the all-out attack. So what? Is it just a war of attrition now? Just whittle them down as much as you can with their weaknesses? No, actually. You see, the Mayas repel all physical except Pierce. You can deal considerable damage to the Mayas when they're down using Ken's Cruel Attack by setting him to attack Fallen. Quick refresher, Cruel Attack is a Pierce elemental skill that does bonus damage to fallen enemies. So even if you whiff a few enemies with fire, you still have something to fall back on, and it's only a little less optimal. Meanwhile, you have your wind user set to knock down to keep the Gigas in check. If you do manage to get the all-out attack, so much the better. This isn't the only way to go though, as you could just have your wind user set to assign target and have them keep hammering the Gigas to eliminate him quicker, making the rest of the fight much more manageable. This is a common thing you'll see with the bosses in episode Aegis. Party composition matters a lot more than it did in the original. It's not just about your party's weaknesses or the enemy's weaknesses. You're forced to use the party tactics effectively and truly take advantage of each character's potential. Except Koromaru, I never used him once. I like this a lot. It's like a puzzle, you gotta line all the pieces up. And when you crack the puzzle, it's one of the most satisfying feelings. Something I don't get too much out of games these days. As much as I enjoy Episode Yourself, I really wish it could have had more bosses like these. But again, the general consensus seems to be that this is really advanced stuff, so I can let it go. The dungeon crawling itself is largely the same as the original game, but the aesthetic variation is a little bit better. Something else that might be pretty minor for some people, but is a significant change for me because I'm a nerd, is that store-bought armor pieces now have fixed bonus effects instead of randomized ones. I guess the devs caught on that you could just save scum for the effects that you wanted. However, armors found in the dungeons still have random bonus effects, which is pretty nice. It's a lot more rare and a lot less exploitable. But I did find myself a papal robe with resist fire. Hi, baby! Store-bought weapons still have random effects, by the way. Weakness coverage is nice and all, but I actually favored element boosting accessories for most of the game, only exceptions being a couple bosses. Okay, I think it's time we talk about the big elephant in the room. Yes, I know, they got rid of the compendium. In my experience, you don't really need it for most of the game. It only really becomes a pain closer to the end of the game if you're trying to fuse something specific to harvest heart items, or if you just really want a specific persona instead of making do with general elemental coverage. Honestly though, with a fusion calculator and a little bit of planning ahead, it shouldn't be too much of a headache. The only persona that was kind of annoying to make was Gabriel because I needed to go shovel time hunting for personas in older areas. Most of the other ones I wanted came to me naturally over the course of the game. But exactly what kind of mysteries lie within these dungeons? Why are we here? If you haven't caught on by the first few hours of the game, episode Aegis is about the past. The game immediately makes you wish for the good old days, spending time with your friends, walking your dog, going on trips together. Every character ends up facing their own past within the depths of the abyss. Witnessing these memories leads everyone to discuss the past a lot, and you start to sort of see that bond they used to have back again. Everyone talks about how rough times were back then, dealing with alcoholic parents, losing your childhood to the shadows, being lost with no answers. But then Metis drops the old truth bomb on them and says that's all bullshit. All the things they laugh about, the good times they had, the things they keep fondly reminiscing about, were all part of that past. And then everyone goes silent. No one has any words. A common criticism I see a lot about the original game is that it feels unnatural for characters to be constantly having conversations about their past. I think these people are just still young. As you get older, as you move on from one stage of your life to the next, you start to look back at your life a lot more. I'm speaking from personal experience. I find myself talking about the past a lot with my old college friends these days. Both the good and bad times. And even talk about some of our regrets and what we would do differently. And sure, it might seem weird for high schoolers to talk about this kind of stuff, but they've been through way more than your typical high schooler. People who have been through a lot of shit are gonna reminisce on the past a lot. I know, it's a big shocker to some of you. The memories you witness are actually the reasons for everyone awakening to their personas. They don't make a big show of it like in the other games though. They keep it subtle, which I like. We already see in the main story how everyone changes and finds new reasons for fighting. Their experience of the Death Arcana, which represents change. But here, we get a reminder and a much more vivid image of their initial motivations. Personal growth is good, but it's always good to remember where you came from. The removal of the social sim elements is a double-edged sword. On one hand, you lose a lot of the substance that fleshed out the original game, and made it more than just a dungeon crawler. On the other hand, the story is actually paced pretty well. Something more akin to Persona 1 and 2. You beat a dungeon, then you get some story, then on to the next. While personally, I'm fine with taking long breathers between plot points because that's just how I play RPGs to begin with, it does a good job making sure every dungeon doesn't overstay its welcome. It's literally just a matter of, do you like the dungeon crawling or not? Tangent aside, episode Aegis does a good job conveying its themes, something that often gets overlooked and only assessed on a very surface level by most people. And at the very bottom of the abyss, you finally catch up to the mysterious, totally not obviously shaped figure, the one everyone's been chasing the entire game. The spitting image of the protagonist. And at that moment you realize that, eventually, no matter how much you keep chasing the past, eventually, you have to put it to rest. Right as things could have easily wrapped up, something, interesting happens. Probably the most contentious thing about episode Aegis. The members of SEES have the option to continue back in the present where they left off, or to go back to the past through the protagonist's room. It just seems so weird to bring this up right as everything seems to be wrapping up. Like, they could have hinted at this or presented the possibility earlier, and then they initiate the most forced beef I ever done seen in my life. So when discussing the possibility of going back to the past, they immediately start rationalizing the correct decision. And when Yukari expresses her desire to go back to the past, everyone immediately just shoots her down. She doesn't even put up an argument for her side. She just starts insulting everyone. And then she proposes that if they can't settle things over words, they're gonna have to settle things with violence. And then Metis is just like, okay. And she just has an arena ready for everyone to throw hands at. Now, this might sound like I hate this, but honestly, I really don't. I just really hate how this scenario was written. Let's be real here, the game's been hinting at something like this from the very beginning, where you literally see them going at it, and right after you have a scene of everyone starting to grow apart, the breaking point was coming. For a lot of people, this ruined Yukari's character, and for others, this just gave people who hated her to begin with more ammo. As for me, I actually don't find this that egregious. And the thing is, I can actually kinda see what they were trying to do here. We have literally seen this scenario countless times before. I'm just gonna use Persona 1 as an example. The ideal Maki goes back into Maki's mind. Mark insists on going after her. Nanjo explains with facts and logic why it'd be better to just forget about her and destroy the source of the problem. Mark says fuck you, then everyone's like, shit man, let's go, power of friendship baby. Then they all go back into the danger zone. They all knew what was at stake. They all knew what the most logical option was. It's not like the person in question wanted to be saved, but guess what? Friendship was the right answer. You could draw comparisons to other games that have this similar scenario, but I'm not gonna go around spoiling any more games unwarranted. Just remember, you guys made me do this. That's not what happens here though. Everyone just dogpiles Yukari. And when someone is getting dogpiled, they get aggressive and are less likely to listen to reason. I can actually somewhat respect how everyone else is thinking rationally and not forgetting everything they learned over the course of Persona 3, but remember what episode Aegis is about. It's about stagnating and holding on to the past. Coping with one person's death is not the same as coping with another. I don't think the main problem here is Yukari or how she feels, rather it's the way they present the dilemma. Remember back when Ryoji offered you the choice to erase your memories and live a peaceful life until the fall happens, to die a painless, instantaneous death, while your other option was to attempt to do the impossible and defeat Nyx, and probably die a much more gruesome death. The wrong choice is much more tempting in this case, because you're immersed in the story. Sure, you might know what the right answer is already, but you're also thinking about what you would do in this situation. That's the main issue I have with this infamous scene. It's not Yukari, it's how it's made so blatantly obvious what the right choice is, and how that third-person lens that we see through really prevents us from empathizing with Yukari's wishes. This is honestly where I think the answer would have really benefited from having a bad ending. Show us the consequences and implications of such a decision. Make it bittersweet like the bad ending of The Journey. Give the player the option to let Yukari get what she wants and let her deal with the outcome. Like an infinite time loop of repeating the past year over and over again. An endless cycle of defeating Nyx and ending up back in the same situation just to keep going back. They would truly be, in a literal sense, stuck in the past forever because they just couldn't let go. But we can speculate what could have been all we want. All we can do now is take it for what it is. And what we did get out of it is probably one of the best boss gauntlets. So everyone divides up into their little factions. Akihiko and Ken want to respect the sacrifices of the dead. Junpei just generally doesn't want to mess with the past, and Koromaru joins him. And finally, Yukari is willing to take the risk of fighting Nyx again, and Mitsuru stands by her. I'll discuss that more later. Abiding basically by the same principles as every other boss you've fought at this point. Every pair of characters work off each other's skill sets, complemented by one of the best boss themes in all of Persona. Heartful Cry really carries all the weight of the situation. The beginning of the song conveys indecision and is shortly followed by the intensity of the battle. Ready or not, it's happening. You have no choice. You, or Aegis rather, are the indecisive one. Everyone makes it abundantly clear that if you don't have a strong enough will to make a decision, you don't deserve the right to decide. Junpei straight up says he doesn't think you can beat Yukari because she has a stronger will than you right now, but you prove them wrong. Yukari finally breaks down, and do you want to know who's the one to finally get through to her? It's Mitsuru. This is another point of contention. Mitsuru chose to stand by Yukari because Yukari stood by Mitsuru when she was at her lowest point. To a lot of people, that's fucking stupid, because she was potentially going to allow Yukari to get her way just to do her a solid. But I want you to remember what I said earlier. When someone's getting ganged up on, that person is not going to cooperate or listen to reason. When people come to me to vent about their problems, I have a tendency to just speak with pure logic without considering the other person's feelings. I try to give constructive advice on how to address the issue instead of truly empathizing with them. And sometimes, that's just not what people need to hear. Sometimes people just need to know that someone will be there for them. Owning someone with facts and logic isn't the solution to everything. Shocking, I know. Sometimes people aren't going to listen to you if you just immediately shut them down. The only person Yukari was going to listen to at this point was someone she could lean on. And once again, right as everything could have wrapped up perfectly, Aegis tells everyone her decision to use the door leading to the shopping district that was basically required for the game to even work, to see the past one last time so they can truly understand the truth behind the protagonist's death. So the whole Great Seal thing was very literal. The protagonist became the seal over Nyx. Such an odd thing when you think about it. Death is neither benevolent nor malevolent. It's a natural part of life. It only becomes evil when people bring it upon themselves or each other. Whether it be to wish for one's own death because life has just become too much for them, or the desire for death upon others out of hatred. And that is the true reason for the protagonist's death. It wasn't to keep death from coming, but to prevent the will of humanity from reaching it. And humanity's yearning for death is something that will ultimately never go away. And of course, because you're right there, you've got one last boss fight. The music here is pretty kick-ass, but the fight itself is... it's pretty easy, not gonna lie. Not as underwhelming as Persona 4's final boss, but still. And now we finally get some closure. The gang step back into the present, but not before a meeting with Igor and Elizabeth one last time. Metis turns out to be the human side of Aegis that she casted away after the protagonist's death. Her overprotectiveness, her fear of being left alone, and it was only because of her that Aegis remembers what it means to be human, and finds her answer to life. Everyone wakes up, Aegis has a Pinocchio moment, and she decides not to send her back to the lab, and to keep experiencing the joys of life. Yukari offers to be her roommate for the next upcoming school term. Kind of a sweet gesture, actually, after seeing all those moments where Aegis clung to the protagonist at Yukari's displeasure. A couple closing thoughts before I end this off. Firstly, there's the possibility of the protagonist coming back. I don't think that's ever going to happen. In fact, I'm not even sure that's what the game was implying. All they said was they wanted to stop people from yearning for the fall, which is something they would probably want to do either way because it's kind of fucked up for people to desire death. You all saw him die on that rooftop, and at this point in the Persona timeline, his body is long past rotted. Yeah, no, there's no coming back from that. At best, his soul will be at peace. And if for whatever reason Atlus does decide to bring him back, Nothing that happens outside of this game will ever ruin its message for me. Secondly, this epilogue kinda contradicts something. Ikutsuki says in the game that Mitsuru did not awaken to her powers naturally, but in the flashback of Mitsuru's awakening, the scientist says everyone here had their potential artificially given to them. But shortly afterwards, he says he's impressed by Mitsuru's natural potential. This might have just been a translation thing, but I don't know. I would need someone who knows Japanese to confirm what he said. Now, I don't think the answer is really all that great. I just figured I'd make a video highlighting what parts I found enjoyable. You're an adult, or at least mature enough to decide how you spend your time and what games you play on your own. Don't just turn something down because some randos online said so. Don't base your opinions on anyone else's experience but your own. And most importantly, don't let someone else's opinions affect your mindset upon coming into a game or movie or anything for the first time. Be your true mind, as the old series saying goes. I'm not gonna sit here and try to urge you to play this game because that was never the goal of this video. If you have no interest in a game, that's fine, as long as it was your decision. I genuinely feel like internet opinion culture is why games can't just be bad. They gotta be hyped up as the worst thing ever, so no one ever plays them for themselves.
It hurts me. It hurts me to play this game and to hear people actually describe it as not bad. Not bad? I'm sorry, but if you think this game is anything good, you're living in a bubble, and not the Sonic kind.
As if it's just fucking impossible to find enjoyment out of something that most people don't like. Or that you can't have fun with a game even if it's fundamentally flawed. I'm not gonna pretend this game is a masterpiece. All I'm gonna say is that no one has any reason to be bothered by you liking something they don't. No one's right or wrong for how they feel. Different people feel different things when they play the same game. That's all there is to it.